Today I'm going to give you a few tips for cutting plywood accurately, cleanly, and efficiently. But first, a word from our sponsor. I'm Ron Paulk, and this is the Smart Wood Shop. If you'd like to get a set of plans to build a smart wood shop for yourself, the brand new Paulk Smart Station or the Paulk Smart Bench, link in the description of the video down below. I use plywood for everything from framing to finish. And most of the time, all of those framing sheets, it doesn't really matter. I'm using a skill saw, I'm snapping chalk lines, and I get it really close, and it's good enough. But when it comes to finish, when I'm building bookcases or building cabinets or my workbenches, I need to be more critical. I want to make sure the plywood is square, perfectly square, and I want to also make sure that the cut edges are not all furred up, particularly if it's a pre-finished piece of plywood when I'm doing cabinets. But even if it isn't, a lot of times I want that really square edge and I can't really sand it off and bevel it off a little bit, so I want a really clean cut. So I have a number of ways that I deal with it, and I'll show you all of the tips. Now, they're not always necessary to do all of them every single time, but I'll show them all to you now. I break down all of my plywood with a track saw. It doesn't matter if it's a Festool or whatever brand or any kind of skill saw where you're working on the top of the wood. The blade spins in such a way that the tooth cuts up through the top. So your splintering is going to be more pronounced, if there is any, on the surface that you're cutting to, so the finished surface. Underneath, because the blade is cutting up into it, you get less tear out, less splintering. One of the things that I like to do is when I'm working on a piece of plywood like this, where this is a white birch or any of the finished plywoods, I like to cut with the side, the good side, the side that I'm going to use, that I'm going to make visible, down whenever possible. In this case, I have the good side up because the first two cuts I want to make are to square the plywood, to put a crisp edge on and square. Now, most of the plywood is pretty square, but it's been transported, and you'll find that the edges aren't as clean as you'd like them. So I want to start by putting a clean edge, and then I want to square off of that edge, so I've got two edges that are very clean and square to each other. Because of the way I work, I want to have that square edge here and here. What I'll do to get that is I want to flip the plywood over and have the B side or the good side down. I'm going to put the first clean edge on the far side there, and then I'm going to square off of that edge, and then I'm going to flip it over, and then I'll have that edge on here and there, and then from there I can do all of my cutting. Now, to get that first clean edge, I am going to be cutting up into my finished edge, and so I want to take a little extra care not to splinter. So the first thing I'm going to do is take just a little bit off, probably about 2 millimeters. With cabinet grade plywoods like this, 4x8 sheets, they're normally a ½ an inch wider or 12 millimeters wider and about 12 millimeters longer than the finished 4x8. That gives you a little bit of room to lose for the blade, as well as to clean up edges like I'm going to do here. I'm going to use parallel guides to set this up. I've got the dimension set here that I want, which is going to take about 2 millimeters off. I would not have to use parallel guides because I'm going to be putting that edge on. I could just make little marks and set the track right where I want it and make the cut, because I'm going to be measuring off of that edge as I go forward. But I'll go ahead and use my parallel guides anyway. This is a little more difficult than normal because I'm filming this. I have the camera up above and it's on a stand right here, and I'm having to work around it, so it's cramping my style a little bit. My first tip for making an actual cut is to make a scoring cut. Because I am cutting with my good surface up, I want a nice crisp edge, and I don't want to splinter or fur that edge up. So I'm going to make a very shallow scoring cut. I'm going to do this by setting my saw at about 2 millimeters depth. Festool track saw, they have a dual scale. One side is for if I'm cutting directly on the wood with the saw, and the other scale is for when it's riding on the track, because obviously the track has a thickness and it'll take away from some of that depth. So looking at the scale for the track side, I'm going to set it at 2 millimeters. The second thing I'm going to do is, instead of making the traditional cut the way I should, following through in this direction, I'm going to actually back cut. I'm cutting very shallow, and I'm going to have two hands on the saw. This could be an operation if you were working just on a piece of wood and you're cutting that way, you'll be going in the wrong direction and the saw will want to run away from you. So you want to be very careful. This is a professional technique and you want to use good saw technique. So with two hands, I'm going to plunge in and I'm just going to back through the cut to make the first scoring cut. So now that scoring cut is made, and if I weren't filming this, I would have stopped right at the finished cut there, shifted this down to the thickness, and this just went right back through. So this can flow very quickly. So I'm going to set the depth at about 20 millimeters. This is 18 millimeter plywood. That'll get the blade below the bottom, but not cut too deep into my sacrificial strips, which are underneath. And that's another thing. It's not to do with cutting plywood, but protecting your bench. I use sacrificial strips, so my material that I'm cutting is hovering above my finished bench by 3/4 or 18 millimeters in this case. So now I have a very clean, sharp edge and there's no tear out. I can't see the underside, but I can feel it, and I know because of the cut of the blade that the underside is just as clean. Now what I want to do is square this edge. Again, I'll be flipping the plywood over, so I'll have this edge square and this edge square, and then I'll be pulling from here and here to do all my cutting. In this case, I'm using my TSO square that's on the track. I'm not actually using the scale. This is flipped up. It just is connected, and by flipping this up, it's out of my way. I am squaring, I'm putting it up to that edge, getting it good and square, and I'm just going to eyeball it and get it again about to that 2 millimeters or so to put that edge on it. Just like I did on the rip, now with this cross cut, I'm going to set the saw at 2 millimeters and back cut it. This is where the camera is getting in my way. Normally I just come right over here and flip it over, but I have to be careful here. And now I'm ready to start breaking it down. I have my clean edge here, my square edge here, so I can do all of my squaring off of this, all of my length cuts. If I'm going to do any rips, I can do it off of this edge. I have the good side down, so I can either do that 2 millimeter back cut if I want to be very careful, but you can see I did not do the scoring cut. Probably the camera doesn't pick this up, but I have just as clean of an edge on this underside, which I did not score, as I did on the top side, which I did score. So I can infer from that that if I go ahead and just speed things up and make my cuts, that I will get a clean cut on the underside. So if I'm building cabinets or bookcases or things, I'm going to have very clean plywood. I know these tips will help you up your game. If you're a professional contractor, you'll be able to provide a better finished product and be more efficient for your clients. Or if you're working around your own home, it'll allow you to produce those professional results. If you enjoy these videos, if you learned anything, be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe. And remember, when you subscribe, ring that bell so you'll know when I put up a new video. And if you get a chance, share my channel with somebody else. Thanks for dropping into the Smart Wood Shop. You stay safe and have a great day.